There is a big difference in how you ask for something and whether or not you'll get that. We can all think of a time where we asked for something at work and we didn't get it. Now, can you pinpoint why it is that it didn't work out? In this video, what we're going to do is give you 5 tips to ensure that the next time you ask for something that you want, you just might get it.
At the Dental MVP, we use science to teach people skills to you, the dental professionals. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, the Dental MVP, and don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss out. Now, when it comes to asking questions of things that you really want, we tend to get a little bit fearful. The best thing to do is to inwardly look at ourselves and to ask the question, what's the worst that can happen? And truly answer that question. If the answer is something like they say no, well, then the second thing to ask yourself is, can I live with it? And if you can, then move forward with it. A lot of times we have that fear of rejection. It's just a normal thing that all of us human beings go through. So this is a great way to kind of push yourself past those limits of being fearful of rejection and say, okay, if this is the worst that can happen, if they're just going to say no and I can live with it, let's do it. So if your answer right now is I can live with it, then let's go through 5 tips on how to ask for what you want.
The first tip is to know how to really format the question. A lot of times we walk into these situations thinking, well, I need new instruments or I need this, but we have to make sure that we're delving in and that we're being more specific than that. So what is it that you need? If it's new instruments, okay, that's great. That's a good start. But what type of instruments do you need? How many are you going to need? And a lot of times we think about how it impacts us personally, which is great because we do want to communicate that. But we also have to think about how is it that having new instruments, for example, would impact the productivity of the team as a whole, because we want to make sure that we're communicating as a team and asking as a team, really, because ultimately everything falls down to having an impact on the group as a whole. So delving and getting really specific. So what it is that you need, why it is that this is needed, and how it impacts the productivity of the practice as well.
Remember that this is how to have a successful question, right? To be able to ask for what you want and potentially get it. So the more specific you can be, the better. You really want to make it super clear what you're asking for. I mean, like literally, if you're using the example of the instruments, go down to the detail of not only how many instruments you need, what instruments you need, but when you need them also. Like really dive deep into those specifics.
Yeah, if you can get the idea of the cost, that's great.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, if you can throw the cost in there. This is how much it's going to cost, when I need it, how I need it, why I need it. The more information that you can give, the better. And then you can start to format how you're going to ask these questions.
Tip number 2 is going to be using words that incorporate we and us. A lot of times, because we somewhat operate independently throughout our work days, we really think of problems as impacting only us. Now, the challenge is that when we go to have a conversation with someone about these barriers, when we use those words like I or you, so I don't have the instruments, you haven't purchased instruments, it makes it a defensive situation instead of a collaboration to come to a solution. So if we can use those words like we and us, it shows that it's a team effort and that it's going to take a team approach to be able to solve it. Now, it's okay to start out with saying, I feel this way about this. Can we have a conversation on how to address it? That's perfectly fine. You don't have to eliminate the word I entirely. It's just trying to incorporate more we and us words.
Tip number 3 is to stay positive. And I know we say this a lot, but in situations like this where we're really frustrated and we're asking for something, it's really easy to go into that negative mindset to say why we need this, why we should have this, and to approach it from a negative perspective. We want to be as positive as possible. It can be really easy to cause some blame and shame, especially on our employees, to say, you haven't provided this for me. She got instruments before I did. I haven't gotten instruments in this amount of time. And you're really just trying to pitch your idea, but it feels like you're blaming them, that they're not providing you with what you need. And the moment that we cause any sort of blame or shame, the human brain will go into that fight or flight response. And when you have that, your ideas and your concepts are now not going to be listened to. So we really want to stay positive as much as possible. Remember, this is a team effort. So we're talking about we and us, like Chastity spoke about. We're really making sure that we go into the needs of the practice as well as our own needs, but we're approaching it from a positive aspect as much as you possibly can.
Tip number 4 is going to be to give a positive invitation. So we've gone through formatting a question, what details you need, using the words like we and us, really getting yourself in that positive mindset to have the conversation. Then you need to invite someone to have the conversation with you. A big pitfall that we usually fall into is we say, I need to talk about this. This isn't okay. We need to discuss this. And it really starts it off on the wrong tone. So if we can invite someone to have a conversation by saying, hey, can we have a conversation about this? It allows them the opportunity to accept that invitation and know that it was something they agreed to. So they agreed to partake in that conversation, which means that they're going to agree to be able to work towards the solution as well, to whatever the issue may be or whatever the ask is that you're going to have. So really making sure to extend a positive invitation.
Now, when you're having these positive invitations, when we're looking at somebody and saying, hey, would you be willing to have a conversation with me about X, Y, or Z? I want you to be very mindful of not only your tone of voice, but also your body language. Remember that these are huge influencers in what our intentions are. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and you ask them, hey, would you be willing to have a conversation with me? That feels a little bit too aggressive. So calm yourself down, make sure that you have a positive tone when you're saying, hey, would you be willing to have a conversation with me about this? That feels a lot better. Now, also, we want to exude confidence and competence when we have these conversations. We're really fearful to hear the word no, and we don't want to show that in our body language. So if you're asking them, would you be willing to have a conversation with me about this? And we're kind of retracting our shoulders and looking down at the floor and not showing competence, they're not going to know that it's so important to you to have this conversation. Now, don't take this the wrong way. The person might just get really busy, and the way that you presented that, they might say, not right now, because they don't see it as being important and something that you really are excited to have a conversation with them about. So be very mindful of your body language and your tonality when you ask for these invitations and when you're asking the question in general.
Tip number 5 is going to be to ask questions to better understand the other person's point of view. You have done a lot of work leading up to this point. So you've figured out all of the details. You have taken that leap of just asking to have the conversation, which can feel intimidating enough on its own. Now we want to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity to understand the other person's perspective, because where the conversations tend to fall short is that once we ask for what we want, say it's those new instruments, the response might be, well, we can't afford it right now.
I've heard that before.
And we just let it go. We say, okay, that's a no. We can't afford it. It's a no. We can't get the instruments. And we walk out of the room feeling defeated with all the work that we put into having this conversation. But we want to make sure that we delve deeper to understand, what would affording it look like? Is there an area that we could improve production or improve efficiencies to be able to afford it in this area? When could we be able to afford it? Is there a budget or a timeline for getting new instruments? What would that look like? We really want to make sure that we delve deeper into understanding the kind of background as to why it's a no at this time or why
without
the answer was not yes.
Why, though. So notice how Chassie did not ask why. So instantly, the moment that you said that, I want to know why. I'm like, why? Like, why can't we afford this? Like, we afford everything else. You got new instruments. Why can't I get new instruments? Like, it's so easy to mentally go there. That's the direction that we don't want to go. And believe me, that takes effort. So know that going into this conversation, that you know that you're going to have to really refrain from those type of questions and just really look at them like you want to understand their point of view. To them, it might really be that they don't see the instruments as being that important, or that they don't know that they need to be replaced X, Y, and Z so often. But we want to know what their point of view is. And the only way that we can get there is with asking the right questions. So use hows and whens. When you ask questions like that, people are allowed to look at it from an outside perspective. So when you say, how can we achieve this goal? They're just looking at it like, okay, that's a great question. If you say, why can't we achieve this goal? Then they're looking inwardly and they're looking like a blame shame situation. And that's what we want to avoid. So stay positive and really be interested in what their point of view is so that you know what the next question is that you can ask.
And then you're going to know in the future if there is a time. So if there's a set expectation of, we can't afford it at this time, but if we could afford it, it would be probably 3 months from now, then you know, okay, this is a conversation that we should schedule to have together in 3 months. to make sure that we're planning for that. So there is a next step. So you don't walk out of this meeting, this conversation feeling like it's a no and it's an indefinite now. Because no is indefinite. Situations change, scenarios change. There's just so much that happens that can impact the outcome of what these conversations look like.
Okay, now that you're ready to have this conversation, let's keep a few things in mind to really ensure that you might get what you really are asking for. First things first is remember that people are not mind readers. We do this all the time where we assume that if we're kind of walking by and we're going, oh, it'd be really nice to get some new instruments. When's the last time I got new instruments? Or the doctor opens up their new instruments. You go, I would really love new instruments. We all have those moments. It's just human nature, but people are not mind readers. So even though we're saying it over and over and over again, if we are not sitting down and having this really specific conversation with individuals, they're not mind readers. And we're not going to get what we're asking for. So remember, no one is a mind reader.
Next, set your expectations high. A lot of times we are fearful to ask for what it is that we need, so we kind of reduce what our expectations are. So if we look at our cassettes and say, wow, I really need 20 new instruments, instead what we ask for is 2. And maybe we'll ask for 2 repeatedly over a period of time to gradually get to that amount. But don't be afraid to be able to have the conversation to ask what you want. Remember that if the worst thing that can happen is a no, you can live with that.
I'd rather get a no to 20 instruments than to 2, because then how will I ever ask for 20?
Yeah. So just remember to keep your expectations high for what it is that you need to be able to do your job effectively. Lastly, go back and revisit those conversations that you've gotten no's for. Take these tips, see if it changes the way that the conversation happens. Now, remember, even if you feel like you got a no out of one conversation, situations change and circumstances change. So make sure to go back and have those conversations again. Try different words that you can use or incorporating different details to ensure that you're able to come to a good solution and a good outcome.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to like it and leave us a comment. I really hope this video helps you to get what you're asking for. Make sure to subscribe to the Dental MVP so you never miss out.